In today's talks, Mr. Zelensky will be supported by European leaders.
Even Ukraine can't believe it, but the leaks pouring out of Brussels, Paris, and Warsaw in the last 48 hours confirm what once sounded like science fiction. The European Union, long mocked by the Kremlin as a bureaucratic giant without muscle, is quietly finalizing the most ambitious military plan seen on the continent since World War II. For the first time in modern history, European leaders are preparing to deploy a 100,000-strong multinational force to Ukraine. A move so audacious, so unimaginable only months ago, that even Kyiv's generals were left stunned when they first heard whispers of it. What started as closed-door meetings among defense ministers has spiraled into a coordinated wartime mobilization. The word now circulating in NATO corridors is not possibility, but readiness. Troop lists, staging grounds, and logistics routes are already being drafted. This is not theory anymore. This is Europe preparing to march east. And in Moscow, panic is spreading like wildfire. Because this is precisely the nightmare scenario Vladimir Putin never believed would materialize. Europe united, armed, and ready to fight. Across European capitals, the tension is palpable. Paris is drafting deployment orders. London is securing airlift capacity. Warsaw has begun expanding forward bases on the Polish-Ukrainian border. Berlin, reluctant for so long, is under intense pressure from its neighbors to contribute. European generals who once ruled out boots on the ground are now drawing maps, calculating how to insert armored brigades through Poland and Slovakia into the heart of Ukraine. What is most shocking is the number: 100,000 troops. This is not symbolic peacekeepers. This is not a token brigade. This is a full-scale, multinational force large enough to reshape the battlefield overnight. For Ukraine, it represents salvation. For Russia, it represents strategic collapse. 3 years into the war, Moscow had grown confident that the West's involvement would stop at weapons shipments, intelligence, and financial support. Putin gambled everything on that assumption, believing European democracies were too fractured, too weak, and too hesitant to risk their own soldiers. But the tide has shifted. Leaked strategy papers reveal that the EU now sees Ukraine not as a distant conflict, but as Europe's front line. If Ukraine falls, the Baltics could be next. If Kyiv collapses, Poland's borders could face Russian armor. The domino theory that many dismissed at the start of the war is now being taken seriously by the very leaders who once mocked it. And this is why Europe has crossed its own psychological Rubicon. No longer content with sending shells and tanks, the EU is preparing to send its sons and daughters into Ukraine itself. Behind the scenes, the numbers being circulated are staggering. France and the UK are expected to spearhead the coalition with rapid deployment units, airborne brigades, and armored battalions. Poland is preparing to commit nearly 30,000 troops, its largest deployment since the Cold War. The Baltic states, terrified of being the next targets, have pledged thousands of soldiers despite their small populations. Denmark, the Netherlands, and even Italy are quietly positioning themselves to contribute significant forces. This is not a symbolic coalition of the willing, this is a wartime army in the making. And if 100,000 troops really do cross into Ukraine, the very fabric of the European security order will be rewritten in an instant. The Kremlin, of course, is in disarray. Russian state media, normally loud and boastful, has shifted into damage control mode. Propaganda anchors admit, almost nervously, that European interventionist forces may soon enter Ukraine. For months, Putin has claimed that Russia was already at war with NATO, but until now, that was a bluff. NATO soldiers were not on Ukrainian soil. If Europe deploys even a fraction of the rumored 100,000 troops, Putin's propaganda suddenly becomes reality, and that reality is one Moscow is utterly unprepared to face. Directly engaging French, British, or Polish troops would be political and military suicide, yet allowing them to establish themselves in Ukraine without response would shatter Russia's image as a superpower. This is why, according to Western intelligence sources, panic has erupted inside the Kremlin's general staff. They're scrambling for options, but every option looks like a trap.
European planners envision 3 primary tasks for this unprecedented force. The first is deterrence, establishing a visible armed presence along ceasefire moments and in major cities, making it impossible for Russia to launch new offensives without risking direct combat with European soldiers. The second is protection, guarding power plants, bridges, railroads, and water facilities that Moscow has systematically bombed for 3 years. If Europe stations troops at these sites, Russia loses its most effective tools of blackmail. The third mission is humanitarian, clearing mines, securing aid corridors, and shielding civilians. Yet make no mistake, these troops will not be unarmed observers. They will come equipped with tanks, drones, artillery, and air support. They will not attack Russia, but they will defend themselves with lethal force. That alone makes them a nightmare for Putin. The numbers are crucial. In past peacekeeping missions, Bosnia, Kosovo, tens of thousands of soldiers were required to keep fragile peace. Ukraine is 10 times larger, both in land and population. Western analysts estimate that at least 80,000 to 100,000 troops are necessary for any real deterrence. Anything less risks being seen as a bluff. That is why the figure being floated now, 100,000, is not arbitrary. It is the threshold Europe must cross if it wants Moscow to take the threat seriously. The symbolism of such a number cannot be overstated. A 6-digit force is not a gesture, it is an army. Already, logistics are being set in motion. Poland and Slovakia are set to become the logistical heart of the deployment. Rail lines are being reinforced, highways cleared, bases expanded. Satellite images reveal unusual activity near Rzeszów in southeastern Poland, the same hub through which most Western weapons have entered Ukraine. Military analysts believe this space will transform into a staging ground for entire divisions. In Slovakia, warehouses and airfields are being repurposed for fuel, ammunition, and equipment. In Germany, U.S. transport planes are suddenly running round-the-clock flights moving supplies east. Something enormous is brewing, and it is no longer possible to hide it. The Kremlin is responding in predictable but desperate ways. Russian bombers have increased their flights near NATO airspace. Propaganda outlets scream daily that Europe is dragging itself into war. Cyber attacks have spiked across European capitals, targeting government servers and media outlets. Russian agents are suspected of attempting sabotage operations in Poland and Lithuania. The nuclear card is once again being waved, with Putin himself hinting at tactical options if foreign troops land in Ukraine. Yet behind closed doors, Western intelligence reports suggest the nuclear threats are more bluster than reality. Russian generals know that using nuclear weapons would cross a line that could trigger NATO's full retaliation, a war Russia cannot win. Meanwhile, in Kyiv, disbelief has given way to cautious hope. President Volodymyr Zelensky has reportedly been briefed on the outlines of the plan, and sources close to his office say even he was shocked by the scale. For years, Ukraine begged for direct military support and was repeatedly told no. Now, the possibility of tens of thousands of European troops on Ukrainian soil represents a dream Kyiv barely dared to imagine. Yet Ukrainian officials are also wary. They know that if this deployment fails, if Europe fractures or retreats, the blow to morale and unity would be devastating. For Ukraine, this is a gamble, but it is one worth taking. In Washington, the reaction is calculated. The United States has made clear it will not send ground troops, but it has promised to provide the air umbrella: intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, and missile defense. F-35s, already patrolling the skies over Poland and Romania, would extend their shield deeper into Ukraine once European troops are deployed. The formula emerging is simple. Europe provides the ground muscle, America provides the sky cover. Together, they create a deterrent that Russia cannot afford to test. Inside Russia, however, the mood is darkening. Soldiers at the front, already exhausted, are hearing rumors that soon they may face not just Ukrainians, but French paratroopers, British armored units, and Polish mechanized brigades. For many, it is demoralizing. For officers, it is terrifying. A war they thought was contained to Ukraine could suddenly expand into a continental showdown. And for Putin, it threatens the very narrative he has built his regime upon, that Russia is strong, united, and untouchable. If 100,000 European troops march into Ukraine, that illusion collapses overnight.
The streets of Moscow reflect the unease. Whispers spread about conscription. Prices rise as sanctions tighten. Families quietly discuss the possibility of a new draft. Many Russians believed the war would remain distant, something fought by professionals on TV screens. The thought of facing a 100,000-strong European army changes everything. It makes the war feel not just endless, but unwinnable. And that psychological shift may prove deadlier to the Kremlin than any missile strike. Europe itself faces its own tests. Leaders know that once soldiers are deployed, casualties are inevitable. The question is whether European publics, long shielded from war, will endure the sight of coffins returning home. In France, in Britain, in Poland, politicians are already bracing for backlash. Yet for now, polls show surprising resilience. Majorities in many countries believe supporting Ukraine is not just charity, but survival. The logic is brutal. Better to fight in Kharkiv today than in Warsaw tomorrow. This is why the mobilization is accelerating. Not next year, not next decade, but now. The outlines of the force are being drawn. The equipment is being prepared. The troops are being briefed. Europe is on the edge of a decision it has avoided for 80 years, to fight for its own security with its own soldiers. If the 100,000-strong force does materialize, history will record it as the day Europe woke up. And in Moscow, that awakening is the one nightmare Putin never wanted to face. European military strategists are already sketching the likely deployment zones. The first scenario being considered is along the ceasefire lines, creating hardened security belts manned by multinational brigades. These zones would act as buffers, preventing sudden Russian offensives while allowing Ukrainian forces to regroup and rearm. For Moscow, such zones would be intolerable, because firing on them would mean risking war with the entire European coalition. A second scenario focuses on the defense of Ukraine's critical infrastructure. Since 2022, Russia has hammered power stations, dams, and rail networks. Stationing European troops at these sites transforms them from easy prey into fortified targets. This would deprive Russia of its favorite weapon, infrastructure terror. A third deployment concept emphasizes humanitarian protection. Mines litter fields, schools remain in rubble, and aid convoys face constant danger. European troops could secure humanitarian corridors, turning chaos into relative order. These three missions, deterrence, infrastructure defense, and humanitarian protection, are already being written into operational outlines. Logistically, the staging of such a force is a mammoth undertaking. Poland has quietly expanded its rail networks eastward, preparing to funnel heavy armor across its borders. Airfields in Slovakia and Hungary are being reinforced to handle non-stop sorties of transport planes. Even Germany, often hesitant, has begun clearing storage facilities once used during the Cold War to stockpile fuel and ammunition. This buildup resembles nothing less than the preparation for a continental campaign. For the first time in decades, Europe is behaving like it expects a war on its doorstep and is preparing to meet it head-on. The Kremlin's intelligence agencies are fully aware of these movements. Satellite intercepts, informants, and reconnaissance flights have already reported unusual NATO activity near the borders. Yet there is little Russia can do to stop it. Its army is bogged down in eastern Ukraine, its economy strangled by sanctions, and its political elite increasingly paranoid. This is why Moscow has doubled down on hybrid warfare. Cyber assaults in Paris, Berlin, and Warsaw have tripled. Propaganda campaigns are flooding social media, attempting to turn Europeans against the idea of sending troops. Russian bots spread stories of European sons dying for American wars and Ukraine draining Europe's future. The aim is clear: fracture European unity before it reaches the battlefield. But the unity seems stronger than expected. For France, this is a chance to reclaim its role as Europe's military spearhead. For Britain, a chance to prove its post-Brexit relevance. For Poland and the Baltics, it is raw survival. Even countries like Italy and Spain, traditionally cautious, now whisper about sending at least symbolic contingents. The symbolism matters. Even a company of Spanish or Italian troops in Ukraine makes the coalition broader and Moscow's propaganda weaker. The phrase circulating in Brussels, a coalition of the willing, is becoming reality. And unlike previous EU security efforts, this one carries real teeth. Meanwhile, the Russian public is being bombarded with mixed messages. State television insists Russia is strong, ready to face NATO if necessary. Yet ordinary Russians see cracks. Mobilization orders are creeping into the regions again. Soldiers return from the front with horror stories, whispering about drone swarms, Western artillery, and now the terrifying prospect of European armies joining the fight. The gap between propaganda and reality widens, and with it grows quiet dissent. Russia can suppress protest, but it cannot suppress fear. And fear is spreading.